What if the energy crisis we've all been warned about is no longer a distant possibility, but a stark reality? Imagine waking up one morning to discover that your electricity bill has doubled or even tripled, and that the energy you once took for granted is now scarce and expensive. Sound extreme? It's not. In fact, it could be just around the corner. The world's most powerful economies are on the verge of a colossal shift, and the US is at the center of this storm. A political and economic collision course that could reshape how you experience energy forever. Let's break it down. Former President Donald Trump, known for his bold decisions and unpredictable policies, has just made a move that will affect every American. He's imposed a new energy tax, a decision that could drastically alter the cost of energy in the US and send ripples through the global markets. But that's not all. Across the Pacific, China, a rising global superpower, has turned off the gas taps, halting its energy exports to the US. This is no mere coincidence, but a strategic move that will send shockwaves throughout the energy sector, leading to higher prices, shortages, and possibly even a new Cold War over energy resources. As we stand on the precipice of this new energy crisis, the question remains: how did we get here? Why are two of the world's largest economies playing such dangerous games with the most essential commodity, energy? And most importantly, what does this mean for you, the average American consumer? The stakes couldn't be higher. With Trump's tax increase, US energy production faces even more hurdles, potentially pushing prices to unsustainable levels. The sudden shutdown of gas exports from China only adds fuel to the fire, and as if that weren't enough, the ripple effects are already being felt in the markets, sending shockwaves through stock exchanges and energy companies. It's a perfect storm, with energy prices poised to skyrocket, leaving consumers in a scramble to adjust. But there's more to this than just economics. This energy war is also about power, political and global. As Trump's tax policies clash with China's energy maneuver, we are witnessing the opening salvo of a broader geopolitical battle. It's not just a matter of energy anymore, it's a fight for dominance. A fight for control over one of the most vital resources in the modern world. This isn't just a story about prices at the pump or your utility bill climbing higher. This is the story of a global struggle for power, influence, and survival. And you, whether you realize it or not, are caught in the middle of it. The decisions being made today will have lasting impacts on everything from your personal finances to the stability of the global energy grid. The question is, how will you navigate this unfolding crisis? What steps can you take to prepare for the inevitable changes? So, before you brush off this new energy crisis as just another headline, think again. This is the moment when the world begins to change in ways we never thought possible. The next steps are critical, not just for the US, but for the entire planet. Stay tuned, because what comes next could be the beginning of a new era in global energy. When former President Donald Trump made the decision to impose a new energy tax, it wasn't just a typical policy shift. It was a declaration that could send shockwaves through the American economy. While the world watched his every move during his presidency, this new tax felt like a direct challenge to the very foundation of the country's energy policies. Trump, known for his controversial and bold decisions, has always been a figure who reshaped the political landscape, but this move could have ramifications far beyond anything we've seen before. The reality is, the world is changing. The energy crisis that seemed like a distant concern is now knocking on America's door, and Trump's decision to impose an energy tax is a reflection of this escalating pressure. It's no longer about just reducing emissions or promoting clean energy. It's about survival. The way Trump sees it, the US can no longer afford to let energy costs spiral out of control without taking drastic measures. But there's something deeper at play here. This decision isn't just about economics, it's about power. Power over a resource that, until now, has been largely taken for granted. Energy is more than just a commodity. It's a weapon. By imposing the new energy tax, Trump is signaling a shift in America's priorities. It's no longer about maintaining the status quo, but about taking charge of a system that's been built over decades. The tax, while positioned as a necessary step for America's long-term economic health, has all the markings of a more strategic play. The global economy is increasingly dependent on energy, and with rising geopolitical tensions, Trump's actions may be positioning the US to not just withstand an energy crisis, but to control it. By leveraging tax policies, he can force American companies to adapt, innovate, and transform the way energy is consumed and produced. However, the tax is also deeply controversial. Critics argue that it will disproportionately affect lower-income Americans who will bear the brunt of the higher energy prices. But Trump isn't known for his ability to win over every critic, and his policies often cater to the interests of corporate giants and the wealthy. This energy tax, then, could be seen as a way to shift the burden to those who can most afford it, while bolstering the American energy industry as a whole. For Trump, the key to economic prosperity lies in controlling vital industries like energy, and this tax could force the US to rethink its entire approach to energy production and consumption, making it more self-sufficient and less reliant on foreign powers. The economic impact of this tax could be massive. The energy sector is one of the largest industries in the world, and any change in its structure or cost has a ripple effect on everything from transportation to manufacturing. The tax will likely push up the cost of fossil fuels, which are still the backbone of America's energy infrastructure. As a result, industries that rely on cheap energy, such as manufacturing, agriculture, and transportation, will face increased operating costs. These sectors could struggle to stay afloat, passing on the additional costs to consumers. But the tax could also spark innovation in renewable energy, as companies look for ways to offset the increased cost of traditional energy. For some, it may be the catalyst needed to accelerate the transition to cleaner, more sustainable sources of power. There's also a strategic element to the tax that cannot be ignored. The US has always been at the mercy of global energy markets, with oil prices and gas supplies fluctuating based on geopolitical factors outside of its control. By imposing this tax, Trump is essentially pushing for a rethinking of how America approaches energy production. If the US can't rely on other nations for its energy needs, it must find ways to become self-sufficient. This is not just about making energy more expensive, it's about forcing a long-term shift in America's energy landscape. At the same time, this decision doesn't come without risk. If the tax is too burdensome, it could stifle economic growth and lead to public backlash. Americans are already struggling with the rising cost of living, and the addition of higher energy taxes could push many families to the breaking point. The middle class, already squeezed by inflation and stagnant wages, could find it even harder to make ends meet. The question then becomes, will the US government be able to justify these sacrifices as part of a larger plan for economic stability? And more importantly, will the public support this drastic change? Trump's energy tax, then, is a gamble. But it's a gamble that could pay off in ways that are not immediately apparent. It's a bet on the future of American energy, on the ability of the country to adapt, innovate, and overcome the challenges of a rapidly changing global landscape. Whether this strategy succeeds or fails will depend on how effectively the country can transition from dependence on foreign energy sources to a more self-reliant and sustainable model. The path forward is uncertain, and the stakes couldn't be higher. So what do you think? Will this energy tax be the key to unlocking America's energy future, or will it be the spark that ignites a broader economic meltdown? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe this bold move will push America toward energy independence, or is it too risky? China's strategic gas shutdown, a blow to global markets, while the US scrambles to redefine its energy policies under Trump's controversial tax decision across the Pacific. Another seismic event is unfolding. China's sudden and deliberate halt of natural gas exports to the United States. At first glance, it might seem like a purely economic response, a reaction to America's tightening grip on its domestic energy structure. But make no mistake, this isn't just a trade maneuver, it's a calculated geopolitical strategy, one that exposes how fragile the global energy market truly is, and how vulnerable even the world's most powerful nation can be when energy becomes a weapon rather than a commodity. China's decision wasn't announced with drama or headlines. It was quiet, precise, and coldly efficient. In the world of global trade, silence often speaks louder than words. And when the gas stopped flowing, Wall Street didn't even have time to brace for the hit. Energy futures plummeted. Logistics chains reliant on Chinese liquefied natural gas contracts were thrown into chaos. Major U.S. corporations, particularly in manufacturing and tech, faced immediate uncertainty. China's message was clear. If you want to challenge us on the world stage, be prepared to feel the chill when we cut the heat. What's deeply unsettling about this move is its timing. Just as the U.S. introduces internal energy reforms and adds financial pressure on domestic energy providers, China strikes a nerve that reveals how deeply interdependent these two global giants have become. For years, American policymakers touted energy independence. But the hard truth is that even with rich domestic resources, America still relies heavily on strategic international energy partnerships. And when one of those partners, especially one as central as China, pulls away, the entire system begins to wobble. The ripple effects were immediate. American ports that had become accustomed to receiving steady gas shipments from Asia found themselves idle. Industrial centers, particularly in the Rust Belt and the South, which had pivoted to cleaner energy models dependent on LNG, now face the terrifying prospect of regression. Power grids that had delicately balanced supply and demand are now being stress-tested under new, unpredictable variables. And for the average citizen, it translates into delayed services, higher costs, and a creeping sense of insecurity about what's really going on behind the scenes. But China's gas shutdown isn't just an attack on infrastructure, it's a flex of political muscle. With the global community watching the escalating tension between Washington and Beijing, this move serves as both a punishment and a warning. Economically, it squeezes U.S. industries. Politically, it challenges America's global leadership. And diplomatically, it tests the Biden administration's, or potentially Trump's return, ability to maneuver in a world where economic alliances can shift at the drop of a policy. There's also a psychological warfare element at play here. For years, China has positioned itself as a stable energy partner. Its investments in African gas fields, Russian pipelines, and Central Asian resources were strategic pieces of a long-term vision. And now, just when the world needs collaboration the most, it chooses confrontation. That changes the perception of China from a global player in trade to a potential threat in energy dominance. The implications stretch beyond the United States. European markets, already destabilized by the conflict in Ukraine and energy insecurity from Russia, are looking at China's actions with growing concern. If Beijing is willing to use energy as leverage against the US, what's to stop it from doing the same with the EU or smaller nations heavily reliant on Chinese supplies? This move also reveals a deeper alignment forming on the world stage. China isn't acting alone. Analysts have started connecting dots that point to growing energy cooperation between China, Russia, and Iran. These nations, each facing various degrees of Western sanctions or isolation, are increasingly uniting around the idea that control over energy equals control over the future. It's not hard to imagine a new energy axis forming, one that challenges the US-led global order, not through military aggression, but by slowly turning off the taps. Back in the US, and this disruption has led to mounting pressure on energy companies and policymakers. Emergency meetings are being held behind closed doors. Strategic reserves are being reassessed. State governments are beginning to reconsider the role of foreign energy contracts in their power grids. And citizens, for the first time in decades, are being reminded that energy isn't just something that comes from the wall outlet. It's a currency, one that can be taken away without warning. In the midst of this storm, Wall Street is watching carefully. Investors are suddenly pulling out of renewable energy ventures tied to Chinese supply chains. Fossil fuel stocks are surging, not because of demand, but because of fear. And in boardrooms across America, CEOs are having tough conversations about diversification, risk, and survival. Even the most powerful corporations are not immune to the shockwaves when a global player like China decides to flip the switch. So where does this all lead? The reality is, we're entering a new era where energy is not just a commodity, it's a strategic weapon, one that's used not only to gain leverage in negotiations, but to destabilize entire economies. China has made its move. The question now is, how will America respond? Will it double down on internal reforms, seek new international allies, or fall into a reactive spiral that weakens its position on the global stage? Before you scroll down, let me ask you this. Do you think China's gas shutdown is just the beginning of a bigger plan? Comment the phrase "energy is power" if you believe the real game is just getting started. The ripple effect on U.S. energy infrastructure. As the tension between the U.S. and China reaches new heights, the impact of these energy disruptions starts to seep deeper into the very fabric of America's energy infrastructure. The truth is, the U.S. has long prided itself on its vast energy resources, from its massive oil fields to its expanding renewable energy initiatives. But with Trump's new tax policies hitting the industry, China's strategic shutdown of gas exports, and the rising global demand for energy, the question must be asked, can America's energy infrastructure withstand the pressure? For years, the U.S. has operated with a certain level of complacency when it comes to its energy sector. While the world looked to Middle Eastern oil reserves and Russian gas pipelines, America relied on a mix of domestic production, imports, and trade agreements to power its massive economy. There was a sense of stability, an understanding that no matter the geopolitical shifts happening elsewhere, the U.S. had the resources and infrastructure to weather any storm, but that stability is now being threatened. And it's not just about the disruption of gas exports from China, though that is certainly a critical factor. It's about a larger, more systemic issue, the fragility of America's energy grid. The U.S. energy grid, as advanced and sprawling as it is facing a multitude of challenges. A major part of the problem lies in its outdated infrastructure. For decades, the system has operated under the assumption that energy would always flow from large, centralized plants to homes and businesses. But this system is inefficient, vulnerable to both cyber attacks and natural disasters, and increasingly unable to meet the growing demand for cleaner, more sustainable energy sources. In many ways, the energy grid was designed for a different era, one where fossil fuels were king and the global energy landscape was more predictable. Trump's energy tax is only the beginning of what could be a broader transformation in how the U.S. produces and consumes energy. The tax may push industries to innovate and find ways to offset the increased costs of traditional energy, but it also forces many companies to adapt quickly to avoid financial losses. Smaller, less agile players in the energy sector are already struggling to keep up with the new regulations and market conditions. While large energy conglomerates can weather the storm, mid-sized companies are being forced to make difficult decisions, scale back, innovate, or risk losing it all. For some, the energy tax could push them to the brink of collapse. The disruptions caused by the shutdown of Chinese gas exports are compounding this problem. The U.S. energy infrastructure has become so deeply entwined with international supply chains that a single disruption in the global market sends shockwaves throughout the entire system. With China pulling the plug on gas exports, American utilities are scrambling to secure alternative supplies. Natural gas prices are already on the rise, and this could spark a chain reaction that forces prices higher for all forms of energy. For consumers, this means paying more at the pump, higher electricity bills, and increased costs for everyday goods that rely on energy for production and transportation. The situation is even more dire for certain sectors of the economy. Industries that have transitioned to cleaner energy sources, such as wind and solar, are now facing the reality that they may not be able to keep up with the increasing demand for power. The push for green energy was supposed to be the future, but now, in the wake of these disruptions, it feels like the present is being threatened by an energy shortage. As the demand for alternative energy rises, the infrastructure needed to support it is still underdeveloped. The green energy sector is growing, but it's still a long way from being able to fully replace traditional energy sources, especially if those sources are in short supply. In addition to the physical limitations of the energy grid, there's also the growing problem of cybersecurity. The US energy infrastructure is an attractive target for cybercriminals and state-sponsored hackers alike. A single breach could disrupt power to millions of people, causing massive economic damage and public unrest. The US government has made efforts to improve cybersecurity, but with the rise of geopolitical tensions, these efforts are being put to the test. If China or another nation were to target America's energy infrastructure in retaliation for Trump's policies, the consequences could be catastrophic. In the midst of all this, the American public is beginning to feel the strain. From rural areas to bustling cities, people are starting to realize just how vulnerable the system really is. As energy prices climb and reliability becomes a growing concern, the average consumer is starting to question whether the energy they depend on will continue to flow freely. And it's not just about the price. People are worried about the long-term stability of the energy grid. Will there be enough electricity to power homes? Will gas prices remain affordable? What happens if the lights go out, and for how long? This sense of uncertainty is creating a ripple effect throughout the country. As Americans brace for what could be a prolonged energy crisis, there's a rising awareness that the nation's energy infrastructure needs a serious overhaul. It's no longer enough to simply rely on fossil fuels or a dated grid system that can't keep up with modern demand. The US must invest in new, more resilient energy infrastructure, one that is capable of withstanding not only natural disasters, but also the evolving political and economic challenges of the 21st century. So, where does this leave us? The future of the US energy infrastructure is at a crossroads. The country has the resources and the potential to become a global leader in energy innovation, but it's going to take a concerted effort from both the public and private sectors to make it happen. The challenges are real and the stakes are high. The US must decide whether it will continue to rely on a crumbling system or take bold action to build a future-proof energy grid that can withstand the pressures of a rapidly changing world. What do you think? Can America's energy grid survive the mounting pressures, or is the system too fragile to weather this storm? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think it's time for a complete overhaul of America's energy infrastructure? Impacts on US households. Will you pay the price? As the energy crisis begins to intensify, one of the most concerning aspects is how the average American household will bear the brunt of these rising costs. The combination of Trump's new energy tax, the shutdown of Chinese gas exports, and the ripple effects on the energy infrastructure is a perfect storm that threatens to drive prices skyward. For families across the country, this could mean paying significantly higher prices for electricity, gas, and even essential goods that rely on energy for production and transportation. But the impact won't just be felt at the gas pump or on your utility bill. This crisis will reshape how Americans live, work, and make everyday decisions about what they can afford. At the heart of this energy crisis is a sharp increase in energy prices. While higher prices may seem like a natural consequence of limited supply and increased demand, the rapid escalation is shocking. Families already struggling with inflation will find themselves facing even more financial strain. Imagine the household that's already stretched thin. Working families who are just getting by now have to deal with an extra burden. The money that once went toward other necessities like healthcare, education, or retirement savings will now be redirected to cover skyrocketing utility bills and rising gas prices. For many, the choice will become stark. Do you pay the electric bill or do you put food on the table? The energy tax imposed by the government under Trump's direction will only exacerbate this situation. The tax will create a cascade effect across industries, with businesses passing on the increased costs to consumers. Gasoline, electricity, and even grocery prices will climb, making it more difficult for families to make ends meet. It's a tough pill to swallow, especially when you consider that many of these families already live paycheck to paycheck. The burden of these higher costs could push many households deeper into debt, making it harder for them to ever recover. But it's not just about the rising costs of energy, it's about the underlying instability in the system. As Americans face this new economic reality, the question of how sustainable their current way of life truly is becomes unavoidable. In the face of higher costs, many Americans will have to make painful decisions about their lifestyles. Will they continue to rely on air conditioning during the summer heat, or will they be forced to endure sweltering temperatures to avoid the high costs of keeping their homes cool? Will they have to cut back on driving or even forego vacations altogether just to afford basic necessities? These are the kinds of choices that families will be forced to make as the energy crisis takes hold. In addition to the direct financial impact, there are also broader psychological consequences to this situation. The stress of managing skyrocketing bills and the uncertainty of what tomorrow will bring can take a heavy toll on mental health. Families already dealing with the pressures of work, school, and raising children will now face the added burden of an unpredictable and unstable energy market. As the cost of living continues to rise, the feeling of helplessness will likely grow, further dividing the nation between those who can afford the escalating costs and those who can't. This disparity could spark political and social tensions, further fraying the social fabric as Americans struggle to adapt to an increasingly hostile economic environment. It's not just the working-class families who will feel this strain. Middle-class households will also be hit hard. These are the families that may have had some cushion to absorb increases in their living costs, but as energy prices climb, that cushion will quickly disappear. It's easy to assume that higher-income families will be insulated from these changes, but even they will have to contend with the broader consequences of an unstable energy market. For businesses, higher energy costs mean higher production costs, which in turn leads to higher prices for goods and services. Everything from food to consumer electronics to healthcare will become more expensive, making it harder for families to maintain their standard of living. But perhaps one of the most insidious effects of this crisis is the hidden cost, the cost of opportunity. As households struggle to cover basic expenses, they will have less disposable income to invest in the things that help them build a better future. Education, career development, and even retirement savings could all be sacrificed in order to make it through the month. The American dream, once built on the idea of hard work and upward mobility, becomes more elusive as the cost of living rises and the prospect of financial stability seems increasingly distant. As these financial pressures mount, Americans will begin to question their government's priorities. With the cost of energy climbing and the middle class bearing the brunt, it's easy to see how political resentment could fester. People will begin to ask, why is the government imposing these taxes when they're pushing families into financial ruin? Why is the country relying on a fragile energy system that leaves them vulnerable to supply disruptions and price hikes? The answers will not come easily, and the blame will likely fall on those in power who failed to protect the interests of the very citizens they were elected to serve. In the face of all this, Americans will be forced to adapt in ways that could fundamentally alter how they interact with energy in their daily lives. The days of cheap, abundant energy may soon be over, and in their place, a new reality will emerge, one in which every household must find ways to do more with less. Will innovation save the day? Will families turn to renewable energy sources or find ways to live more sustainably? The answer may depend on the speed with which the government and private sector can work together to build a new energy system that is more resilient, more affordable, and more sustainable. But in the meantime, the question remains, can American households survive the energy shock that's coming their way? The rising cost of energy is a threat to the very foundation of middle-class life in the US, and the pressure on families will only intensify as the crisis deepens. How will you cope with the rising costs of energy? What sacrifices do you think will become necessary as the energy crisis unfolds? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think this crisis will change how Americans live for good? The political aftershock. Trump versus China. As the energy crisis continues to unfold, the geopolitical consequences of these moves begin to take center stage. The decision by former President Donald Trump to impose a new energy tax and China's abrupt halt of gas exports to the United States has ignited a political firestorm. The battle isn't just about energy prices. It's a battle for global influence, power, and control over one of the most critical resources in the world. This is no longer just a domestic issue, it's a geopolitical chess game with far-reaching consequences. The stakes have never been higher as America faces not only an economic crisis, but a political and strategic one as well. Trump's tax policies, though aimed at revitalizing America's energy sector, have placed the country squarely in the crosshairs of global superpowers. China's response, in the form of halting gas exports, is a direct challenge to US leadership. For years, the US and China have been locked in a bitter trade war, but this move escalates the conflict in a way that energy has never been part of before. By using energy as a political weapon, China has made it clear that it will not sit idly by as the US attempts to shift the global balance of power in its favor. What makes this political standoff so significant is that energy isn't just a commodity, it's a lifeline. In the global order, nations that control energy resources hold enormous leverage over others. For decades, the US has been a dominant player in global energy markets, and with Trump's energy tax, America was positioning itself to maintain that dominance. But with China pulling the strings behind the global gas supply, the playing field has suddenly shifted. No longer is the US in a position of strength. Now it must navigate a complex web of economic sanctions, trade agreements, and international diplomacy to avoid a full-blown energy crisis that could destabilize the country. The impact of this move will ripple across US foreign policy. For the Biden administration, this is a critical moment. The energy crisis is now tied directly to the broader question of America's global influence. If the US cannot maintain control over its energy resources, it will lose its position as the dominant superpower, not only in energy, but in other critical areas like technology, defense, and trade. China's bold move threatens to undermine decades of American foreign policy, and this puts immense pressure on the White House to find a solution. The US cannot afford to back down. It needs to ensure that its energy future remains secure or risk becoming vulnerable to China's growing influence. This geopolitical tension is further complicated by the growing energy alliances between China, Russia, and Iran. These countries, all facing varying degrees of Western sanctions, have increasingly turned to each other for support. Their growing energy cooperation signals the creation of a new geopolitical bloc, one that challenges the US-led global order. If China succeeds in using its energy resources as leverage against the US, but it could set a dangerous precedent, one that could encourage other nations to do the same. The consequences of this could be far-reaching, as countries around the world begin to question their reliance on American energy policies and look for alternatives. Meanwhile, Trump's energy tax policies have created a domestic political firestorm as well, while his supporters argue that the tax is necessary for the US to maintain its energy independence. Critics say that it will put an unbearable strain on the American middle class. The political fallout from these policies will be felt in the 2024 elections and beyond. If the energy crisis continues to worsen, Trump's decisions could become a central issue in the national debate. His opponents will likely frame the tax as a key example of his administration's failure to protect American workers, while his supporters will argue that it is necessary to ensure the long-term stability of the US energy sector. In this highly charged political environment, it is clear that the US will need to make difficult decisions. Does it double down on Trump's energy tax and seek to fortify its position as a global energy leader? Or does it reconsider its approach and attempt to reach a diplomatic resolution with China? The latter option may seem unlikely, given the deep divisions between the two countries. However, with the global economy teetering on the edge of a major energy crisis, there may be no other choice but to find a way to cooperate. This would require not only political will, but also a willingness to navigate a complex diplomatic landscape. The political aftershock of this energy crisis is just beginning to unfold. As the US and China continue to clash over energy resources, the broader implications for global power dynamics are becoming clearer. What happens next will depend on the ability of the US to manage the growing pressure from both domestic and international forces. Can the country remain united in the face of such a crisis, or will the divisions deepen, both politically and economically? The energy battle between Trump and China has set the stage for a new era of geopolitical tension, one that will shape the world for years to come. But what's next for the US? Will it regain its footing on the global stage, or will China and its allies manage to emerge victorious? What do you think will happen in the next few years as this conflict intensifies? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. How do you see the political fallout from this energy crisis unfolding? Energy companies in crisis, the fight for survival. As the US energy market teeters on the edge of collapse, one question looms over the industry: will energy companies be able to survive the turmoil ahead? With Trump's new energy tax, skyrocketing gas prices, and the ongoing disruption caused by China's decision to halt gas exports, the challenges facing the US energy sector are unprecedented. These companies, once giants of the industry, are now scrambling to adapt to a rapidly changing environment. For many, the future is uncertain, and the battle for survival has already begun. The energy sector, like any other industry, thrives on stability and predictability. Energy companies have long depended on a relatively consistent balance of supply and demand. But that balance is now shattered. The sudden shock of rising taxes and the loss of a critical energy partner in China has left many companies vulnerable. Some, particularly those in traditional fossil fuels like oil and gas, are seeing their profits shrink as the cost of production rises and demand starts to dip. Others, in the renewable energy sector, while positioned as the future of the industry, now face the daunting reality that their growth may be stunted by the rising costs of energy inputs and a lack of reliable infrastructure to meet the growing demand. It's easy to assume that the large, established energy companies will weather the storm. After all, they've done it before, surviving oil price crashes, regulatory changes, and political upheaval. But this time is different. The dynamics at play are unlike anything the industry has experienced before. The US government's decision to impose higher taxes on energy producers, while aimed at promoting sustainability, has created a perfect storm of higher costs, lower profits, and increasingly volatile market conditions. For many companies, particularly those operating on thin margins, this new reality could be too much to bear. The rise of green energy companies, which had previously been seen as the long-term solution to America's energy problems, is now under threat. The push for renewable energy was supposed to be the silver bullet that would reduce the country's reliance on foreign energy sources while simultaneously addressing climate change. But with the cost of fossil fuels rising and energy taxes making production even more expensive, the transition to cleaner energy is no longer as straightforward as it seemed. Companies that had bet on wind, solar, and other renewable sources of power are now finding themselves caught in the crossfire, unable to compete with the rising costs of traditional energy sources. In the short term, this puts smaller companies at a severe disadvantage. Many of these smaller players, who have invested heavily in renewable energy infrastructure, are now facing crushing financial pressure. They cannot afford to absorb the rising costs of energy, and the political landscape is not in their favor. With government policies shifting rapidly and energy prices fluctuating wildly, they face an uphill battle just to stay afloat. Mergers and acquisitions are becoming more common, as larger companies swoop in to buy up smaller players in an effort to consolidate power and control over a shrinking market. But the challenges don't end there. The sudden halt of gas exports from China has exposed the vulnerabilities in America's energy infrastructure. Energy companies that had relied on a steady supply of natural gas from China are now scrambling to find alternative sources. This disruption is not only causing massive financial strain on companies, but is also forcing them to reconsider their supply chains, their production methods, and even their long-term business models. Companies that once viewed China as a reliable partner are now left scrambling to adapt to a new reality, one where energy resources are no longer guaranteed and the market is more volatile than ever. The financial strain on energy companies is leading to more layoffs, plant closures, and cutbacks in operations. The ripple effects of these cuts will be felt throughout the economy, as energy companies are major employers and key players in the supply chain for a wide variety of industries. With fewer jobs and lower wages, the American workforce will feel the direct impact of this crisis. The loss of jobs in the energy sector will not only hurt individual families, but could also set off a chain reaction of economic instability. As unemployment rises and economic uncertainty grows, the broader economic impact will become more apparent. This crisis isn't just an economic issue, it's a national security issue. Energy is a critical component of any nation's security infrastructure, and a failure in the energy sector can have far-reaching consequences. The US is increasingly reliant on foreign energy supplies, and disruptions in the global market are exposing the country's vulnerability. Without a reliable and secure energy infrastructure, the US could be left exposed to geopolitical threats, with foreign powers potentially holding the keys to America's energy future. This makes the survival of energy companies all the more crucial, not just for the economy, but for national security as well. The road ahead for US energy companies is filled with uncertainty. They will have to navigate a landscape that is rapidly changing, one where the old rules no longer apply. The rise of renewable energy, the imposition of higher taxes, and the disruptions caused by China's actions have created a perfect storm that is testing the resilience of the energy sector like never before. Only the companies that can adapt, innovate, and find new ways to thrive in this volatile environment will survive. For those who fail to do so, the future is bleak. In the end, the survival of US energy companies will depend on their ability to think beyond the immediate crisis and adapt to the new realities of the global energy market. As the energy industry grapples with these challenges, the question remains, who will come out on top in this battle for survival? Will it be the fossil fuel giants that have dominated the industry for decades? Or will the renewable energy companies prove that they are the true future of the American energy landscape? What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Do you think the traditional energy companies will adapt and thrive, or will new players in green energy take over the market? What's next for the global energy landscape? As the energy crisis continues to unfold, the world finds itself at a critical juncture. The dynamics of global energy are shifting in ways that were unimaginable just a few years ago. The US is grappling with an energy tax that is forcing a re-evaluation of its energy strategy. China has strategically turned off the gas taps, and the ripple effects of these moves are beginning to reshape the global energy market. With nations increasingly relying on each other for energy security, this sudden disruption is setting the stage for a new era of energy geopolitics. The question remains, where do we go from here? And what does the future of global energy look like in a world that is rapidly changing? The answer isn't simple, but one thing is certain: this crisis is far from over. The energy industry, which has long been dominated by a handful of powerful players, is now facing the reality that no nation or company can act as though it's insulated from the global energy turmoil. For the US, this energy crisis is forcing the country to reassess its position on the global stage. The once unshakable assumption that America could always rely on cheap, plentiful energy resources has been shattered. As the country's energy infrastructure crumbles under the weight of rising taxes, volatile markets, and geopolitical tensions, the US will need to find new ways to secure its energy future. But the US isn't the only country facing this dilemma. All over the world, nations are starting to realize just how vulnerable they are to the ebb and flow of energy supply. In Europe, countries that have relied heavily on Russian gas are now scrambling to find alternative sources, as Russia has used energy as a tool to exert political pressure. China's aggressive stance on energy, with its halt of gas exports to the US, has added another layer of uncertainty. And countries in the Middle East, which have long controlled the lion's share of global oil production, are seeing the rise of alternative energy sources, leading them to rethink their long-term strategies. The entire global energy landscape is being redrawn, and nations must adapt or risk being left behind. One of the most significant shifts we're likely to see is a dramatic acceleration of the transition to renewable energy. While fossil fuels have dominated the energy sector for centuries, the disruptions caused by the energy tax in the US, the rise of geopolitical tensions, and the growing awareness of climate change are pushing the world toward a cleaner, more sustainable energy future. Solar, wind, and hydropower are no longer niche markets. They are rapidly becoming the backbone of the global energy supply. This shift is not just about addressing environmental concerns, but about energy security. Countries are beginning to realize that the more they rely on domestic renewable energy, the less vulnerable they become to external shocks, whether they come in the form of price fluctuations, supply disruptions, or political maneuvers from other nations. At the same time, the energy transition presents its own set of challenges. The infrastructure needed to support renewable energy, whether it's solar farms, wind turbines, or energy storage systems, is still in its infancy. The world's energy grids are largely designed around fossil fuels, and integrating renewable sources into these grids requires a complete overhaul of the way energy is produced, stored, and distributed. This transition will be expensive, and many countries will struggle to keep up with the pace of change. Additionally, renewable energy isn't always as reliable as fossil fuels. Solar and wind energy depend on weather conditions, and energy storage solutions are still not as efficient or affordable as needed. These challenges will require not just government action, but significant private sector investment and innovation. The push for energy independence will continue to shape the future of global energy. In a world where no country can afford to be overly reliant on another for its energy needs, the race for energy self-sufficiency will intensify. This could lead to a future where countries invest heavily in renewable energy and energy storage technologies, with a goal of minimizing their exposure to global energy price fluctuations and supply disruptions. At the same time, nations will likely seek to secure their energy future by diversifying their energy sources. The US, for example, will look to strengthen relationships with countries in the Western Hemisphere that can provide reliable energy supplies, such as Canada and Mexico. Similarly, countries in Asia will look to diversify their sources of energy, building relationships with new suppliers in Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. For multinational energy companies, the future is also uncertain. The global market for oil and gas is changing, and companies that have relied on fossil fuels for decades will need to adapt or risk being left behind. This could mean diversifying into renewable energy sources or investing in new technologies to capture and store carbon. Those companies that fail to adapt may find themselves irrelevant in a world that is rapidly transitioning to clean energy. In many ways, the global energy market is moving toward a paradigm shift where companies that can innovate, collaborate, and create sustainable solutions will thrive, while those that cling to outdated models will struggle to survive. The geopolitical implications of this energy transition are significant as well. The energy crisis has exposed the vulnerabilities of countries that depend on foreign energy supplies, and this could lead to the formation of new alliances based on energy security. We could see countries with abundant renewable energy resources like Brazil, Australia, and certain African nations rise to prominence as global energy players. Meanwhile, countries that have relied heavily on fossil fuels, such as Saudi Arabia and Russia, may find their influence waning as the world moves away from oil and gas. This shifting power dynamic could have far-reaching implications for global politics, trade, and diplomacy. In the coming years, the world's energy future will be shaped by both the opportunities and challenges presented by this unprecedented crisis. The path forward will require bold leadership, collaboration across borders, and a willingness to embrace new technologies and strategies. As countries scramble to secure their energy futures, the global energy landscape will continue to evolve, creating both risks and opportunities for those who are prepared to navigate it. As the energy crisis deepens, what will the world look like in a decade? Will nations successfully make the transition to renewable energy, or will we see a world that is further divided by energy dependency? How will the US position itself in this new order? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Where do you see the global energy landscape heading in the next few years? If you've made it this far, we want to know how this video has impacted you. Please take a moment to comment below with "I like the content" and share how this message has resonated with you. Your thoughts matter, and we want to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can continue receiving transformative content that challenges and empowers you. Give us a thumbs up to support this mission, and of course, make sure to check out the next video that's already popping up on the end screen. May God bless your life abundantly as you continue on your journey. Stay inspired, stay focused, and let's continue moving forward together.